And we are live. Back with another Boxing Squared live stream. This one obviously a little different. We're sort of doing the post-fight review live and getting your thoughts and comments. Oleksandr Uysk versus Anthony Joshua. Now, this was quite the fight. Oleksandr Uysk and the new. So I really enjoyed this fight. It had basically sort of a lot of the elements that I thought it would, that it was going to ebb and flow, that it wasn't going to be all one-way traffic, that we would see both guys getting the better of the action at different spots. And we certainly did. This was a very good fight. Oleksandr Usyk putting on a clinic and showing us, that he is one of the best boxers in the world and that he is an elite heavyweight. There can be no doubt about that. Oleksandr Usyk outboxed Anthony Joshua for a comfortable points decision. So 117-112 on the Ukrainian judge, the American judge 116-112, and the British judge 115-113, and unanimous to Oleksandr Usyk. And I think there can be no doubt about that. There were some close rounds here and there, but I mean, I think of the close rounds I gave, one to Joshua, one to Usyk. My card, 116-112. Oleksandr Usyk puts on the fight of his life. He really did. He's been training and preparing for this one ever since he took control of the cruiserweight division, became the undisputed champion. So the fight proper, it really was a good fight. I don't think anyone expected that Oleksandr Usyk was going to come out so fast, so strong. And it sort of, I think, surprised Anthony Joshua, because Joshua came out, wanted to take center ring. Oleksandr Usyk wouldn't be denied, wouldn't be pushed back. He was working early and often, and it was a very fast start. It's hard to see how anyone wouldn't have given Usyk those first 3 rounds. But like I say, there was ebb and flow in this fight. You had Anthony Joshua starting to make his way back into the fight. Rounds 4, rounds 5. And some of his best punches came sort of through those couple of rounds to round 6. And he did have some really good rounds, Joshua himself. He was able to make some adjustments. Usyk just kept working away, chipping away. And he found a second wind because there were some body shots that were really starting to take it out of Oleksandr Usyk, through rounds 6 to 8. And I did say on my Twitter, is Usyk going to get a second wind here? Because he looked like he was starting to slow down. But one of the things later in the fight, Joshua's eye really started to swell up there, and he sort of got the sense as well that he was starting to fade in fatigue as well. Oleksandr Usyk, through his constant pressure, his movement, he almost stopped Joshua in that 12th round. We can't forget that as well. Very fun and absorbing fight. I thought it was going to be a tactical battle, and I said in my preview videos that, anything could happen. A lot of people were expecting that Joshua was going to get a stoppage over Usyk, or potentially Usyk would win on. That could have happened. And we got a little bit of everything, apart from a Joshua stoppage, of course. He almost got stopped himself in a very absorbing 12th round, where Usyk really in that final minute put it on him. And I know a lot of people's feather Usyk was a man on a mission. Career best performance for him, becoming the unified heavyweight champion. Say it again, and the new. Oleksandr Usyk is the heavyweight champion of the world. He has 3 of the 4 belts. There is a rematch clause. I think we will see it. But I guess there's a couple of questions. What was Joshua's game plan? Because he seemed to want to box with the boxer. Didn't really impose himself, but you have to give credit to Usyk for being able to nullify some of Joshua's best advantages. I mean, Joshua was losing the battle of the jabs, for quite a bit of this fight. Usyk was able to use his footwork, get to the inside. That straight left was money throughout the fight. Clearly busted up Joshua's right eye. Usyk himself had a little bit of a nick under one of his eyes as well. It's sort of, round 3 or 4, something like that. But he was able to basically keep up that pressure. A couple of rounds where he lulled, and that's where Joshua started to have success. And that was when I was sort of thinking, is Usyk sort of tiring now? Is he going to get a second win? What's going to happen here? But I had Oleksandr Usyk sweeping those final 3 rounds. Great fight. I mean, this is why we follow boxing, right? This is why we follow boxing, because we want these fights. We want to see these close competitive fights where you don't know the outcome. Either guy has very good attributes. In this case, you had the bigger man who was a good power puncher, a good boxer himself. And I don't want to lost this fight to a guy who was a pound-for-pound talent. We need to be giving Oleksandr Usyk a lot of credit here, because Joshua has been a good champion, has fought good opposition, and Oleksandr Usyk was able to outbox him tonight. Just proved that he is an elite heavyweight. We knew he had elite skills, but was he an elite heavyweight? And he's shown that. Great performance by Oleksandr Usyk. And Joshua, he really did put up a credible effort. He just didn't have any answers, through much of the fight for what Oleksandr Usyk was bringing him. Usyk was able to take that right hand away. He was able to use angles. That footwork, as I say, was sublime. Getting in, able to touch Joshua up to body and head. The straight left was money. I will get to some of your comments and thoughts in the chat. Tell me what you thought about this. So Smick says McCracken out. Well, I guess there will be a lot of dissection now. People will be asking what was the game plan. I'm sure there was a game plan that they were looking to work towards, and clearly it was to work from the center of the ring, use the height and the reach and some of the natural advantages, but some of that was just taken away. Usyk, he's a special fighter. We knew that he was at cruiserweight, but how was he going to adapt? He looked a little shaky at heavyweight. Certainly Chaz Witherspoon, put some hands on him. That was a tune-up. Obviously, he beat Derek Chisora, different sort of fighter. And Chisora really put it on Usyk in those early rounds in that fight. But different sort of fight. And I just, from first round to last round, just captivating sort of stuff. This is why we follow boxing, heavyweight boxing, for these big nights, these big fights, the unexpected results. I mean, I know that there was a lot of people ahead of this fight saying that Usyk was 4 rounds down to start with. But clearly, he got a fair shake of the cards here. I mean, I was saying on my Twitter, I hope they don't rob him, because I thought it was a clear decision for Usyk. After, I think, was it 8 or 9 rounds, it was super tight. I think I had it, was it 4-5-3, 4-4, something like that. But Usyk took those final 3 rounds on my card. Let me know how you had that. So AG says Usyk again shows that AJ has been hyped. Well, I actually think that you do Usyk a disservice with that sort of comment, because Anthony Joshua has fought good opposition, has got some good wins. And if you're trying to say that Joshua was hyped, well, how can we give Usyk any credit? Joshua hung in there quite well, had his own moments, but the better man won tonight. So True Time says, outclassed, outboxing, no stamina. True Time, I always thought it was boxing squid. Why would it be it's boxing squid? Ridiculous comment. DT says, props to Eddie Hearn for not fixing the refs. Well, I think there was that sort of speculation, would it be tighter than the real result? But ultimately, fair shake of the cards for Usyk there. He proved he has trained for this and prepared for this fight for a couple of years since moving up. He was the super champion in the WBO, so he was able to go for a heavyweight title shot. He enacted it, he waited, he almost fought Joe Joyce, but then obviously the undisputed fight fell off, run with it. Great performance by Oleksandr Usyk. So True Time says, don't forget Usyk does way better against taller. What have we got there? So Moshahid says, love AJ, but there's levels. Usyk just too good. Mike says, well done to Usyk, great fight. Simple Boy says, AJ should still fight Fury and that winner fight Usyk. Well, I think what we're going to see now is a rematch. We're going to have this rematch between Joshua and Usyk. And the question is, what will Joshua look to do different for the second fight, whenever that's going to be? And I would note from the post-fight interview, so I just caught that before coming live, Usyk said that he feels he can be better. He felt that he put in a good performance, but he did think that on the Joshua side, while there was some tough and challenging moments from Joshua, that there was nothing special in there or nothing of concern, and that he's not thinking of the rematch right now because he has spent so much time away training. He said since January he's been fully focused on having this fight, that he needs to spend some time with his family. So perhaps we will see this rematch 6 months' time. I mean, I wouldn't expect it will be the end of the year or the first month or two of next year. More likely the rematch for March or April. I mean, I think after this, Joshua probably, several months of training himself, will want some time out, some reflection, and they're going to have to dissect what happened here. Because the smaller man was able to win in several areas of this fight. I mean, we knew that he was going to have the hand speed, the foot speed advantages, but also the smaller man was able to out-jab Joshua. Joshua's head movement wasn't great at times, but he wasn't able to impose himself on this fight. So they're going to have to go away and figure out, well, how do we actually come up with a game plan for the second fight. But yeah, it was a great fight. I really enjoyed it. I didn't expect Usyk to come out so fast. I just sort of thought that, you know, he was going to take a little bit of a look at Joshua and then sort of ease into the fight. But it was sort of a different sort of strategy from some of his other fights where he does start slower. He came right out of the gate, took those first 3 rounds on my card, and then it sort of started into a bit of a pattern back and forth. And through rounds, what was it, 4 to 9, a lot of ebb and flow. Joshua was having some success and landed some good shots, but we did see Usyk has got a chin. He was taking... as he says, Usyk's jab was on point. Yeah, it certainly was. Wayne says, Boxing Squared, I called it for a split decision win for Usyk. Thought UD might be too close, so I called it wrong. But Usyk was just on another level. AJ got broken both physically and mentally tonight. We looked like he was warming into the fight quite nicely through those mid-rounds. But Usyk came back, because I thought that Usyk was really starting to tire and fatigue. So... Nick says, very happy Englishman here. Retro Man says, 10-2 was my scorecard. I think mine was, I'll just double check, yeah, 8-4. But there was 2 close rounds, you know. I think I gave 1 to Usyk, 1 to Joshua. But yeah, I think I would note, was it Howard Foster had it 115, 113. So what's that, 7-5? I can't find 5 rounds for Joshua in the fight. I can get to 4, and that's giving him one of the split rounds. I don't know. It is what it is. He still got the decision. Maybe 117, 112. That was a Ukrainian judge, so interested to see the cards. So Humble Dude says 11-1 on his scorecard. Wow. Jack says, I only had AJ winning 2 rounds as well, but I had a couple of rounds as even. There were a couple of tight rounds. I think, what did I have? Rounds 4. If I can find this. Well-used pad here. Was it round 4? Close. But I thought in the rounds that Joshua won, kind of like Usyk, I mean, mostly they were easy to call. Usyk was just outlanding him, outworking him. And obviously some of that pressure that he was exerting, because he was staying right in front of Joshua, using, you know, that pressure, his footwork, feints, and that constant pressure, I think was taking a toll later in the fight. Joshua certainly through rounds 11 and 12 was starting to look pretty tired and almost out on his feet by the end of round 12. But great win for Oleksandr Uysk. Getting back to your comments here. So Victor says he barely threw any punches. Well, it's hard to hit what you can't sort of hit. I mean, he was having to... I mean, he missed quite a few shots, but Joshua just, I think, from what Usyk was doing, he was nullifying some of what Joshua's strategy, his game plan probably was. He was, you know, making Joshua think twice about throwing, and obviously he was worried about what was coming back at him at times as well, which was, you know, probably on his mind, because he was eating that straight left right from the get-go, right throughout the fight. And Usyk may not be a big puncher, but he can still hurt you. He hurt Joshua. There were a number of moments, what was it, round 3? He certainly had Joshua doing a little bit of a dance, but Anthony Joshua was able to hang in there, regroup, get into the fight a bit, but ultimately Oleksandr Uysk was able to square it away, take those final rounds, and in the end get a pretty comfortable decision, I think, on most people's scorecards. ZH1992 says, Parker fight, a couple of, he did make adjustments after that loss to Ruiz. He brought in a couple of different guys, and we saw a bit of a new style for the... As I raised in my preview video, one of them preview videos from Fight Week, the inactivity for both these guys, you had questions. What was going to happen? You know, there was a number of variables at play here. And one of them was the inactivity, but also Ruiz was out of shape for the rematch. You had Kubrat Pulev was past prime. And I had someone sort of disputing that. But Pulev was a few years out of his prime. He wasn't the best version of Kubrat Pulev because he was just too old. And one of those questions for Joshua was the new sort of, you know, wrinkles that they've been working into his game. How was that going to sort of stack up against a guy that we thought was still in his prime? But Usyk himself, we had questions. I mean, he had been inactive. He'd also been injured at different points. How were things going to play out in terms of, you know, the fight? I saw someone there drop a super chat, so I'll just try to get to that. So Count Drago says Usyk is pound for pound number 1. Pre-Ruiz AJ would have fared better. Well, I certainly think the conversation about Usyk, who is on a lot of people's pound-for-pound list, what happens after this performance. He's come up from cruiserweight. He was the undisputed champion. He's become a unified heavyweight champion with a very good performance. I mean, I don't know if you would sort of fight of the year sort of material, because I think often when people think about those sorts of fights, it's like all-out wars. But he put on a clinic. This was one of the most significant fights of the year to date. Let's face it, the year has been trash. Most of the year we haven't had hardly any of the fights that we would have liked to have seen. We've been given a lot of dross, especially in the heavyweight division. This was a legitimate fight. And both guys came into this well prepared. They had trained hard for each other. And you got to give Usyk a massive amount of credit. I mean, there were a lot of people that had written off Oleksandr Uysk and said he was too small, couldn't do this, that, and the other. Based big shots to body and head, but he persevered. Kept on with the game plan, regrouped, regathered later in the fight, managed his energy, almost had him out of there. And in that post-fight, he sort of said the plan wasn't to get Anthony Joshua out of there early on. He just wanted to work to a strategy, but clearly he was trying to get him out of there late in the fight. And I thought, is he going to get clipped with something? But by halfway through that 12th round, Joshua clearly was spent and had very little on his punches. But you got to credit his footwork, his speed, his Joshua does. Obviously in that one, Joshua had Ruiz hurt. He got clipped by a good shot and couldn't recover. This one here was a boxing lesson that Oleksandr Uysk dealt out here. There were moments of success for Joshua, but just not enough. Usyk was able to impose his style, his will on this fight, and almost had him out of there in the 12th round. So, great fight. Really enjoyed it. Yotabit says Usyk was fantastic, great skills, high-level footwork, weird punch angles, and a lot of level changes. Yeah, there were a lot of level changes. And a couple of times where, sort of 2 or 3 sort of lefts in a row, and Joshua just wasn't expecting it. Morpheus says, and if AJ had thrown bombs from the beginning, he would have blown himself out in 3 rounds. He boxed like he did, not to get exhausted quickly and knocked out. Yeah, I agree with that. He knew that this fight was likely to go deep, and he had to manage his energy reserves. He was probably banking on the fact that Usyk would tire and become more hittable later in the fight. He did ultimately, though, just not land enough. And that's credit to Usyk for what he was doing. His head work was really good at times. Obviously, the footwork, the angles, just he was able to better than Joshua, nullify some of what Joshua wanted to do, particularly later in the fight. I mean, probably those first few rounds, Joshua was like, what's sort of happening here? I wasn't expecting Usyk to come out so strong, because that was a surprise. I don't think many people would have expected that Usyk was really going to put it on him from the get-go. Certainly a bit different. So Todd drops in the Super Chat. Todd Boyd, thank you for that. Great for boxing. We need more players at the top. Well, the landscape shifts a little bit, but for now we're still in a bit of a holding pattern, because we've still got Tyson Fury due to fight Deontay Wilder, and this here will lead to a rematch. So this was negotiated in the contract. So we're going to see this maybe in another 6 months. So Glenn says, I've never seen Usyk move his head so much. Well, I guess he had to. I mean, the end of those right hands, and Joshua was able to land some good shots to the body as well. Usyk looked like he was grimacing at a few different points, and some good shots landed by Joshua, but Usyk was able to persevere, keep imposing himself on the fight. So Victor says, needs to fire his coach. Why would he even try to outbox little fast Usyk? It didn't work, and they didn't even adapt under the fight. Joshua should have pressured him and let his hands go. Well, I think we did see Joshua adapt in the fight. After those first 3 or 4 rounds, he did adapt. He was able to have some success through those mid-rounds, and we did see him start to move forward and pressure Usyk later in the fight as the fight wore on. It's just that Usyk was able to adapt himself and able to counter what Joshua was trying to do, and ultimately swept those last few rounds, at least on my scorecard. Essie says, 2 small people are forgetting Mike Tyson was one of the shortest heavyweights. Okay, it must be a response to someone else's comment there. Colm says, I thought AJ won rounds 5, 6, 8, clearly lost 9 and 10 were swing rounds. Clearly, but 9 and 10 were swing rounds. To be fair, they could have been given to AJ, but Usyk was the deserving winner. And he proved that he could. And in the post-fight, he said that he can be better. I don't know if he can sort of get any better fight. So getting to some more comments here. Will Joshua take the rematch? I think he will. I mean, it'd be interesting to know what was the story with that right eye, because in round 10, that really ballooned up. So he was eating left hands from Usyk like Tic Tacs all night. And in round 10, that really blew up something chronic. So I guess the question is there an orbital bone injury or something like that? Because that sort of blew up pretty quickly in that round. Kind of, a little bit like Daniel Dubois when he got sort of just jabbed repeatedly and then one of them just sort of blew it out. I mean, there could be something that Joshua may have to sort of recover and rehabilitate for a period if he does have an injury, to that right eye that needs some time for, recuperation, healing. And then obviously you'd have to build in a camp. So we're minimum probably 6 months away. I mean, who knows? If he does have some sort of fracture, maybe it could be close to 9 months away. Perhaps there will end up being some sort of deal made where Usyk may end up having some sort of voluntary defense before a rematch. I mean, I would think just the sort of person that Joshua is, he will want that rematch. I'm sure he's very disappointed in himself. You saw after the fight, the body language was totally different. Usyk was acting like the guy who'd won. Joshua, straight on the stool, looked dejected and obviously needed some medical attention as well because that eye injury. So I think that we're going to see it. I think that will fuel Joshua, but we've now had 12 rounds of it. Is it going to look much the same in the second fight and rely on a Joshua sort of power punch to swing the fight in his favor? And he landed some in this fight, but just not enough telling to sort of get into that sort of finishing mode where he is very dangerous. But Joshua, battled away. He was trying to get into the fight. He had spots of success, but Usyk was able to keep him under wraps pretty much. AX said, I mean, I don't think that's the case at all. He came into this fight. If you saw him in the ring walk, he was reluctant. He looked like he was ready for battle. It's just that he had a guy in front of him that brought a style. And this is one of the things I raised in one of my videos in Fight Week, that the southpaw element of this, the aspect of it, couldn't be underplayed. Joshua hasn't really fought any elite southpaws. I mean, he fought Charles Martin to win the title 5 or 6 years ago, but Martin, a static target, ate a couple of hands, didn't want it. Right hands didn't want it anymore. So, this was something that was a bit different. And I know that when I did my video, the sparring Usyk video, the sparring Joshua ones, people were saying, some of these sparring partners aren't very good. And I didn't agree with that at all. But it's just tough to get good southpaw sparring at any real level that could match a guy like Oleksandr Uysk. So Joshua was learning it on the job in there because, you've got a guy that is just so difficult and tricky. And we saw Joshua trying to make adjustments, but then Usyk would make his own adjustments. So Tim says, hope AJ signs something to get them both an interim fight. Had AJ losing 10-2, no need to go straight into it. AJ should fight Mike Perez or something more in line with a southpaw. James says, needed way more. Jono says, guys, everyone's right with Usyk. He's one of the best heavyweights on the planet, guys. AJ, overrated bum. He's no explosive boxer. Fury will reign, probably retire undefeated after Rocky Marciano. So I take it there's not a lot of love there for Joshua from you there, Jono. I mean, I think to basically say that Joshua is a bum and not any good, you're doing a disservice to Usyk. You're underplaying how good he was and how good that performance was. Joshua's been a good champion. He's got a good record, good resume. He's fought good competition. It's just Usyk was the better man tonight. We had questions about Usyk coming up to heavyweight. How would he do? How would he fare against bigger guys? And he's shown us that he can still exert himself, his style, and win well. I mean, that really wasn't that close in the end. He was able to pull away in those final rounds, rack them up, almost had Joshua out of there. So, if Joshua can't take the rematch immediately and there's some sort of agreement that Joshua's going to get a fight at, say if there's an interim fight, I think Usyk would go into the favourite against whoever he faces next. So George says, if AJ weighed in heavy and approaches the rematch exactly like Chisora did, then Usyk then he wins, drop the tactical approach and go full brawler. I'm just not sure that's really him. And I think what we would see, though, if Joshua came in heavier, remember, he's still a big guy, 240 pounds. When he's been over 245, and if he's letting his hands go, he gasses quickly. I think there were spots in this fight where, he got hit and hurt and he had to recover, the energy. He had to manage that. He didn't want to gas out and be taken out. Ultimately, that almost happened later. Usyk will be before Joshua rematch. D-Man says Usyk has never fought a mover. John Usyk has seen plenty of big fighters. Experience showed. I think just trailed off, but I think that's, a worthwhile comment just to note there, because Usyk's pretty much seen everything from his extensive amateur career around in the heavyweight division, especially being able to do what Usyk was doing with his footwork, especially getting Joshua to bite on those feints. That mental pressure of sort of standing there, being able to get to the inside, using angles, and giving Joshua just a lot to think about that ultimately he wasn't able to sort of adjust to completely. He had his moments, he did. But Usyk, the master boxer, won through there. And I know that a lot of people were looking at this fight saying the good big man should always beat the smaller big man. And for the most part, that has been a rule that's been true in the heavyweight division, but there are exceptions. And clearly, Oleksandr Uysk is an exception to the rule in terms of the way that he fights and his style. He came out a lot faster than I was expecting. I think his cardio was better in this fight than it was in the Chisora fight. But he went for a lot longer at a faster pace and a faster clip than I thought he could, especially coming up that fast. But clearly he wanted to get into his rhythm early and make sure that Joshua couldn't establish himself. So Mike Tyson says, from day one, Usyk is simply incredible. NHD says Usyk will KO AJ in the rematch. Usyk's footwork too good for AJ. So Fat Folks Talk says AJ loses the rematch. I had it 9-3, easy work. Shaywin says, I knew he was going to lose. Mr. Blackwing says, Joshua, when he gassed out, he is done. I think mentally Joshua is not made to be a world champion, no hate. So CNH Will says, good big man versus a great little man. Well, he's not that little. I think maybe the height difference for this fight, 6'3", 6'6", was maybe a bit overplayed in the build-up. I mean, when you consider Alexander Povetkin gave Joshua a good fight. He's smaller than Usyk. Carlos Takam hung around for 10 rounds and made it a little difficult at times. He's, 6 foot, 6'1", something like that. And it didn't look like David versus Goliath or anything like that. George says exactly that. AJ has to win inside 4 rounds, blast out Usyk with sheer size and power. I'm just not sure that that's him. That he can sort of fight like that, let his hands go, throw 60, 70 punches, and just, go for an all-out war, because he will gas out and then probably be taken out. And he would be, I'm sure, roundly criticized if he sort of put on that sort of style and went for that strategy and it didn't pan out. But, there's clearly some thinking and some soul-searching and dissection to come for the Joshua camp about what they do, what next. How do they approach a rematch? They've got 12 rounds of footage, to basically form a game plan, but so too does Usyk. He's largely still going to fight the same way and have success against Joshua in a second fight. Clara Keat says, do you think Chisora did better than Joshua? Well, it's hard to compare because different styles, different fighters. People forget that Usyk was the taller man with the bigger reach in that one. But Chisora certainly went in there and threw a lot of shots, but rounds after that. D-Man says Joshua boxed well, I thought. He should have put the foot on the gas a bit more. I think Joshua has more for improvement. He adjusted in the middle rounds. And he was looking good in spots, and he was adjusting. I thought sometimes his jab, he was starting to establish it, then he'd go away from it. Sort of like the body work, for, round 6, 7, 8, something like that. He was really working it in there and having success, started to go away from it. So he was having success, but then couldn't sustain it. But that's credit to Usyk too for adjusting, trying to, avoid those body shots. Just Brian says, how do you think... I'm not sure who that's about. We'll do against Fury. Well, it's kind of... It's an interesting fight. But I'd be reluctant to really sort of talk about that now, given I don't think even if Fury beats Wilder, that's the fight that will. Tyson Fury 6'9" to, or 6'8", whatever he is, to 6'3", and he can box, he can move, he can probably do a few things that'll make it a lot trickier for Oleksandr Usyk than Anthony Joshua, but very good fight. I mean, I'd like to see it. I'm just not sure that it actually happens. And one of the things that Usyk was really trying to avoid tonight successfully, and I thought we'd see a little bit more of, was Joshua trying to clinch and pose himself on. Were a couple of occasions, because I don't think there was a clinch for about the first 4 or 5 rounds. And I thought that the bigger man could have at times tied up, could have lent on Usyk, and there were a couple of spots later on where that did happen. And I don't think Oleksandr Usyk, was all that comfortable. But it was what it was in the end in terms of the sort of the war of the clinches or lack thereof, I guess. Unga says AJ went away from the jab because he kept getting countered. He certainly was, and he was starting to get a little bit sort of reluctant about to let his hands go. But he landed some good counters himself. Stu says, I thought AJ won that on points. Okay, clearly a troll. John Potter says, AJ is easy to analyze. Doing it is a different story. Usyk did it, but clearly we never saw anything that came close to that. I mean, it's easy to sort of talk about that style. I mean, Bellew tried to do that, and he gassed out and was taken out. Easy to sort of, as you sort of say, easy to analyze, but harder to do. Adare says, that's why the WBC Bridgerweight division is a waste of time. Actually, I heard Tony Bellew say that Usyk could consider that if he lost to Joshua. Hopefully we see the back of Bridgerweight. I won't be covering the Rivas versus Jennings fight, just out of sheer protest, because it is a fake division. Glenn says, I'm thinking Joshua could use a stint at the Kronk gym. Well, I'm sure that after this, they'll be weighing things up, just like after the Ruiz loss. He made changes, brought in some extra guys. Was it Angel Fernandez and Joby Clayton? I mean, maybe they'll be analysing the makeup of the team. Maybe it is a case after, a number of fighters in recent years we've talked about. Do they need to, to move on to greener pastures? Fresh ideas? Is there something else that someone else can give to Joshua that maybe Robert McCracken can't? Maybe he has maxed out. I mean, I think these questions people will be discussing. I mean, it's kind of like after a lot of recent Joseph Parker performances when he was with Kevin Barry, people were saying time for him to move on, and eventually he did. So Morpheus says almost a 3-stone advantage for Chisora, but only the second competitive fight for Usyk. I feel he wanted to go 12 rounds with Chisora and test himself absorbing the power shots. Count Drago says, props to Usyk's chin. So 330 in the building, so smash that like button on the way in and on the way out, please, if you could. That would be much appreciated. Wherever you are, morning, noon, or night, I thank you for joining me. The Boxing Squared live stream, post-fight review, live stream after Oleksandr Usyk, 12-round clinic, and the unified heavyweight champion Oleksandr Usyk. Like I said at the top of the live stream, these are the fights that we watch boxing for. Close, competitive, hard to tell what's going to happen heading into them. A lot of people were picking Joshua. A lot of people thought Usyk might be able to get a decision, might get robbed on the cards. Ultimately, he got a fair shake, but there were so many variables heading into this fight. It was hard to really know where both guys were at due to injury, inactivity, all sorts of other factors. Ultimately, Usyk put on the performance of a lifetime, becomes the heavyweight champion of the world, unified heavyweight champion. So AMC8 says, you would think Usyk would take Wilder all day long. Mo Mughal says, I had a feeling that Usyk would up his game plan for this fight to go faster and for longer periods, but pressure and put even more pressure when needed. He trained clearly very hard for that. Yeah, after the fight, talked about hadn't really seen his family all year, been in camp since January. Originally, he was going to be in a Joyce fight, obviously Undisputed fell over, changed to Anthony Joshua, but that's been the ultimate target since he moved up from cruiserweight after cleaning up that division, was to become the heavyweight champion. Anthony Joshua was always in his sight. Part of the reason that they, got him to be promoted by Matchroom. He wanted that fight. So Sly Tendency says, fight mandatories and you can lose Wilder fans. Larry Pint says, great fight, great atmosphere, fair scorecards, and I was right with my prediction. Congratulations to Usyk from Germany. Simple Boy says, AJ terrified to get hit, and it drains him as the fight goes on. And I think, obviously, some of the shots he was taking, that left hand was money for Usyk. It was making Joshua think twice about throwing certain shots because he didn't want to get countered. He didn't want to get hit. I mean, he was hurt by Usyk earlier in the fight. A couple of different shots backed him up, really rocked with the left hand, did a little bit of a dance in round 3. But Usyk proved, he can still hit you. He can still hurt you. I'm sure Tony Bellew remembers getting stopped in, 7 rounds. Mike Tyson says, none of these heavyweights are good enough to beat Usyk, while Vincent says Fury is number 1. I guess that's part of the debate now. Where does this leave the landscape in terms of a top 5? Is Tyson Fury number 1? Does Oleksandr Uysk, on the strength of that performance, overtake Fury, or does he become a number 2? Where does Joshua now sort of fit in that sort of landscape? Because I don't think he was embarrassed or anything like that. He put up a credible performance, but ultimately he was beaten and outfoxed by a better boxer who implemented and imposed himself his game plan on this fight. Stuck in Kiev Boxing Polls said, I had it even through 8. AJ made far better mid-round adjustments after losing most of the first 4 rounds, but then Usyk rallied in the final rounds. Hatton drained the judge money funds early. Yeah, I did see that. That was quite interesting, but that Hatton decision, I didn't think he was going to get it. Probably you'll get Robert Smith saying that drunk fans don't know what they're talking about. Seems to be what they always go on about with the British Boxing Board of Control. Morpheus says, AJ did extremely well in the last round to survive being knocked out, swaying out of the way. He was absolutely ready to go if Usyk caught him clearly in his final attack. Yeah, it looked like that it was going to end, but I guess, when he was hurt, because it sort of, Usyk really started to ratchet up that pressure late in that sort of, the last minute or so. With about 30 seconds to go, I thought, he might run out of time here, and ultimately he did, but he had Joshua on the rack, that's for sure. Jumbo says, who shouted brilliant all the time? I think that was someone in Joshua's corner, wasn't it? And they were ringing out for body shots quite often. And that body work from Joshua was having an impact. And heading into the 10th round, I was thinking, and I said on Twitter, was Usyk going to get that second wind? Clearly he must have been just trying to conserve himself. He was just boxing within himself for a few rounds. Joshua had some success, but Usyk clearly not out of the fight, just biding his time, and he did sort of ratchet things up in those final rounds. And that eye injury of Joshua's, that eye really puffed up. Something chronic in the 10th round. Vincent says, can't believe AJ fans thought AJ would be able to beat Fury. Well, you got to have that fight to really know what's going to happen. Would Fury go in a favourite after that performance by Usyk against Joshua? Yeah, he probably would, but you can't say because Usyk beats Joshua that Joshua can't have a good fight with Fury. I mean, that triangle mentality doesn't always work. Stu Campbell says, I wasn't trolling. I just thought AJ looked the more comfortable and had the better jab. You clearly are trolling, Stu. Larry says, just in comparison, Usyk fought a 165 to 178 age 19 to 22 against the international amateur middleweight and light heavyweight elite. Yeah, at one point as well, he fought Sean Porter, who I think beat him in the amateurs. So Battle Cat says, Hatton result was really bad. UK judges are awful at the moment, and I'm in the UK. So we'll just get back down to the chat's moving pretty quick here. So 342 in the chat. So heading into this fight, I'd be really interested for your takes on this. Just a few quick thoughts from you. How did you see this playing out? Because I had a really tough time heading into this because of so many, and you would have seen that video in Fight Week. There were so many variables. What was going to happen? Where were both these guys at? Because one of the things that I wasn't sure of with a past prime Pulev and out of shape Andy Ruiz, we knew Joshua had improved his stamina, his boxing. He had been clearly working on things and getting better. But was the caliber of those opponents, Ruiz out of shape, Pulev past prime, did it mask a few things? And for Usyk, 2 years basically where he really hasn't fought much. He'd been injured as well. Hadn't really looked impressive at heavyweight. There were questions. But we saw the answer from Usyk, that he's more than equipped for heavyweight. Not just an elite cruiserweight, he is an elite heavyweight as well, winning the heavyweight championship, becoming a unified heavyweight champion in his third fight at the weight. So Liam says, Liam from Australia, morning boxing sweat, hopefully the winner of Fury Wilder fights White in the interim. Or any of those fights. I mean, this is the thing. We've just got to see more fights like this, where these guys who are in the sort of top 5, top 10, getting in there and doing it. We've just got to have more of this. That was a great fight, a great spectacle in the sense that it was close, absorbing. You know, you saw Usyk imposing himself. There was ebb and flow, and then you had Usyk finishing stronger to put it out of question. Because I think after 8 or 9 rounds, there was an argument to say that, you know, some of those rounds, was it 4 and 9, they were quite close, but Usyk clearly finished the stronger. So John says, if you want to know the result, listen to Tyson Fury analysis. Darren says, AJ has a big mouth. James says, can't complain about this fight for sure. CNH Will, I thought Usyk would win, but AJ would get the decision because he's a much bigger draw. ZSJK says, Joshua's defense wasn't there in the first half. It was obviously slightly shell-shocked a little bit in those opening rounds, how quick Usyk started. I think many of us were sort of taken aback by that, but clearly part of his game plan. Joshua tried to take the centre ring. Obviously, Usyk was having none of it. He wasn't taking a backward step. He didn't want to be pushed onto the ropes. He wanted to impose himself. And because of the head movement, the feints, and Joshua was biting on those feints as well, the footwork was just great. It was fantastic. So Unga says the fight played out exactly how I thought. Same as my comment on your pre-fight video. Usyk 3-1 was candy from a baby. Mike says, fantastic fight, loved it. And ultimately, while the scorecards ended up being, somewhat wide, it was a, tense atmosphere, tense fight. It was a great watch, absorbing. You didn't know what was going to happen. Usyk was putting himself in the line of fire and backing his skills to avoid Joshua's power punches. And we saw Usyk get clipped a couple of times, and he, it's not like he wasn't feeling them, but he does have a good chin. But we need more of these matchups. This is part of the reason that, boxing becomes popular, the big nights. I mean, imagine how big the rematch is going to be now. Can Joshua come up with something to blunt the master boxer? It's got to be the question now. I don't think he embarrassed himself, but Usyk, and this is the thing, I'm sure that people will say, and I've already seen it a little bit in the chat here, people saying that Josh was no good. If you're trying to run that narrative, and it would have been the same way in reverse if Joshua had stopped Usyk, you're taking away credit from the guy that won and basically saying the other guy's no good. These were 2 top heavyweights that were in the ring together, something we don't see often enough. Credit needs to go to Oleksandr Uysk for that win. Joshua is a very good heavyweight. I'm not having it any other way for people to say that he's a hype job and no good. Clearly, he's proven himself over time and got a number of decent wins on his resume. Z Sombor says, Boxing Squared, Usyk said at the ring interview, we have not seen his best yet. Do you believe that he can be even better? No, I mean, I saw that after I watched that just before I came live. I think, we might see Usyk come to that same sort of level again, but at the same time, we've seen Usyk before, and he's looked a little subpar compared to this performance. I mean, I don't think we saw the best of Usyk in that Chisora fight, but, he was trying to rally against Derek Chisora, bashing his body. Chaz Witherspoon, his first fight at heavyweight, didn't look that great, but he proved he can, for the big fight, the big occasion, can step up and, put on a performance like this. But I think that was sort of vintage Usyk. And I'd asked previously, where is Usyk? Is he through coming up to heavyweight? Would he be losing speed? Would he be compromising some of what makes him, the best about him? But clearly coming in at about 220 pounds, that's his, to fight the style he likes, even at heavyweight, that was where he needed to be. I think any higher, he would have been giving something away. But I think that was a vintage performance by Usyk. And, who's to say that's not his last great performance? Usyk himself, for the way that he fights, that style doesn't age as well. What is he now? 32, 33 years old. But he proved for now that he's still got it. And, he's probably capable of putting up another performance like that. But it wouldn't surprise me if he fights someone who's considered a lesser opponent, maybe doesn't look as sort of stellar. But clearly, he's a big time, for the occasion fighter. Again, showed us in the biggest fight of his career, and this was the biggest fight of his career, the biggest fight of his life, and he stepped up. Russ says, Boxing Squared, please agree Joshua not on level of Lennox. We can't make those comparisons until boxers are retired. I mean, Lennox Lewis had some unexpected losses in his career, and Lennox Lewis is probably one of these guys that his reputation and standing with boxing fans has improved over time. I don't think Lennox Lewis was appreciated in the way that he probably should have been while he was fighting. KB says Usyk played the game in his 2 previous fights. He had to make Joshua think he could beat him. Sly Tendency says Usyk rose to the occasion. No shade at Joshua. His resume is undeniable. He's fought the best. Larry says, talking to someone else there. James says Usyk, I think, needs the rounds in heavyweight, needed the experience. Morpheus says, yes, Unger, Usyk deserves all the plaudits. Liam says, great show, great fight. High-level boxing with 2 world-class boxers. We need more of this. Yeah, we certainly do. I mean, it's been a terrible year. We're almost at the end of the 9th month, and this is certainly the biggest fight of the year, and we've been made to wait. We haven't had much on the menu, as it were. We've got Fury and Wilder coming up in a few weeks. How close and competitive that's going to be, unclear, but it's also intriguing because what if Deontay Wilder has improved? But then if he hasn't as well, we're going to see that he'll be found out quickly. But I'm looking forward to that one as well. I don't know if it's as big a fight as this one, but it's still a good heavyweight fight with those 2 guys, obviously Fury and Wilder, are top heavyweights. Scott70 says, Usyk put paid to any argument that Ali would be too small for the modern era. Yeah, and I think a lot of people, especially in regards to Muhammad Ali, think about later Ali when they think about him as well. Muhammad Ali, especially earlier in his career, was fantastic. And I think sometimes when guys go on too long, Roy Jones is a little bit the same. People forget about how, in their full flight, how good they were. Stuart says, not sure what's happening in my household. I think I'm hearing children running in the front door. Larry says, Usyk dominated light heavy, cruiser as an amateur, won Olympic gold, became undisputed cruiserweight champion, and now heavyweight champion. Amazing. Well, he's certainly, if he hadn't already, Hall of Famer, pound for pound talent. KB says, great channel. Thanks for reading my post. Got a cheer from the household. Well, hello to the KB household, wherever you are in the world there. Hello if it's... or good night, whatever time of day. 333 in the building. Thank you for joining me. Smash that like button on the way in, on the way in. That would be much appreciated. And as I repeat, hello to the KB household. So Green says, glory to Usyk, glory to Ukraine. Sly Tendencies, remember that styles make fights. Hearn beat Duran, Barkley beat Hearns, and Duran beat Barkley. I said in Fight Week in my preview video, it was the first thing that I made a point of in saying in that video, the fact that Oleksandr Uysk was a southpaw, and the fact that Joshua hadn't seen many of them, especially at anything approaching Usyk's level of skill, that was something I didn't think had been talked about enough. That style that Usyk brings with his pressure, his angles, that was going to be difficult for Joshua, and it was. I mean, the footwork, that was just, in those first 3 or 4 rounds when he was in full flight, it was incredible. So, Soul of the Robots is Prime Tyson, Duck Lewis, quit that tired line. Liam says, having Roy Jones on the broadcast was refreshing. And I noted as well on the DAZN broadcast, they had Kate Abdo. So, I'm not sure if she's no longer with PBC, but I had thought that there was it Maya Jama and a couple of others that they were meant to have. I mean, perhaps because this was still a Sky main broadcast, I don't know. It just sort of seemed to be, they had a few different bits and pieces. Obviously a bit bigger than a normal production because it was a bigger fight, a bigger spectacle. Stadium fight, was it 60, 70,000? Yeah, and that stadium, that looked fantastic as well. It looked like there was no bad seats in the stadium. I've been in a couple of stadiums like that in Australia where you feel like you're almost sitting on top of the action. It's great. Raz says, boxing is back. Well, let's just hope we can get more of that. We've got a number of good fights coming up, not just in the heavyweight division, but also we do have some good heavyweight fights coming up. And obviously, I mean, I did a video on Patreon a few months ago, end of June, saying, was this the worst year of heavyweight boxing in recent memory? Because it has been dire. But these are the nights that we crave and we want. I mean, heading into this fight, Joshua was a favourite. He was the bigger man. You know, he was the power puncher. Usyk, a number of question marks and questions. Certainly no doubt about his skill. But how was he going to perform against a guy at the top of his game in Joshua? And clearly, well was the answer. So Larry says, greetings from Germany to all the real boxing fans. It's not about the O, it's about the performance and will to win. Comfort hurts. I probably said that long. James E. says, Emilio household, so California, USA, Samoan, Irish. George says, Chisora really did a job on Usyk, but lacked AJ's athleticism, AJ's tactics, all wrong tonight. Well, that's going to be part of the dissection now. What could he have done different? I mean, he was biding his time trying to box with the boxer. He was having to deal with what was in front of him. Usyk with his constant movement, you know, using angles, that footwork. I mean, he had a lot of southpaws in his camp. He prepared for a long time. Some of those guys were quick and awkward, but it's hard to prepare for some of these guys at the top of the heavyweight division. It's like we always sort of say, how can you prepare for a Tyson Fury? How can you prepare for a Deontay Wilder in terms of just that big right hand? I mean, some of these guys, you can get guys who are similar attributes, but different skill levels, different abilities, you know, different power levels. It can be tough, but Joshua, so IB Freely says, Kate Abdo hasn't been with PBC since forever. Okay, good to know. Bri Pom says, they rang the bell early, AJ was going down, look back and see for yourselves. IBR Stella says, this was a little like Holmes versus Spinks, but Usyk was given better odds. Morpheus says, no, Chisora didn't nearly do a number on Usyk at all. He put on some tough, hard rounds against Usyk, but I do think that maybe some people overplay, because Chisora gassed out. Halfway through the fight, he was done. Mr. Higgins says, brilliant performance, and it was. Trader Glenn says, Lennox was so good, we forget how good he was because he made all of his competition look like scrubs. I don't think Lewis was appreciated until much after, truly appreciated until much after he retired. Sly Tendency says, Justin, Carl Froch says he doesn't fancy AJ in a rematch. Carl Froch. So I had obviously not in the UK, so I didn't have the Sky commentary, so I don't know what they were saying, but the DAZN commentary, they actually picked Usyk in terms of after the fight. They said they thought they had it clear for Oleksandr Uysk. I'd be interested to know, what was the Sky commentary like tonight? Was there a lot of shroud waving by the likes of Adam Smith, etc.? Do let me know if you did catch it in the United Kingdom. George says Chisora disregarded what was coming back and just went for it. If AJ did the same, he could blast Usyk out. I guess I'll be looking at all these things, but I'm not sure that Josh was really built for that sort of strategy. AMC says, okay, going on about 90s heavyweights. Andy says, in hindsight, AJ's best option was to try blast him out, but Usyk is on a different level. He would have dealt with him anyway. Well, and it's one thing to sort of say, well, because Joshua, bided his time, tried to box with Usyk, but wasn't having the success that people thought he would. It's one thing to say he should just try to blast him out, but Usyk is still an elite mover. If Joshua was really putting it on him, we would have seen what Usyk did to some regards, to some extent, I should say, in that Chisora fight. He would box and move. So we would see him trying to avoid the firefight. I don't think he was going to ever go, just to say Joshua in a rematch to try blast him out. Usyk's not going to be there for that firefight. But also if Joshua is just letting his hands go, he's open for counters as well. So G-Man Boxing, a great channel. If you haven't checked out G-Man, please do. Very good channel. Sky was singing Usyk's praise, had him well ahead. Well, that's good to hear. It was tight at different points in the fight. After, about 8 rounds? It was close, but Usyk finished strong. Mr. X says DAZN commentary was crap. Mark Griffin says Sky told it straight. Well, I guess now that, the fight deal is up with Joshua, they don't have any reason to over-egg things, so it's good to hear. So Dr. Anthony says Sky's commentary was fair, and they all had it for Usyk comfortably. I guess the thing now is what happens with the broadcasting sort of side with Joshua, because we know he's with Eddie Hearn. He's going to be promoted by Hearn for however long his career lasts. They signed that deal in Fight Week. But what now? Because obviously Joshua's stock, he's still a big name and he'll still be popular. He's still a cash cow, but his stock drops a bit. His marketability and his commercial sort of element, that side of things, will take a bit of a hit. So maybe that gives the likes of DAZN and Sky, whoever else that wants to bid on his fights, etc., a bit of leeway and leverage to maybe crib a better deal. But that's obviously a conversation for another day. But it'll be interesting to see, well, where would the rematch be? Does it have to be in the United Kingdom? Or can Usyk have it in the Ukraine? That's if there is a rematch at all. Maybe the rematch won't take place. Maybe there'll be a big gap in an interim fight. Who knows? Mr. Higgins says, might have to talk about this current era of talent. For me, it's fairer than daylight. ZSJK says, geez, that chat's moving fast. That ran off the page. Joshua should have had a counter uppercut there. Well, he was trying to work in a few uppercuts, that sort of trademark where he sort of, has his hand around the sort of neck and tries to work in, an uppercut. Usyk was wise to it, though, and complaining bitterly to the referee whenever that happened. Sly Tendencies, do you think that Usyk fought the way AJ fights others? Well, I think the reality is with Joshua and the way that he fights now is, he's no longer just, because he used to have a certain style, the way that he used to like to fight, but he had to adjust and adapt after that Ruiz loss. I think we're going to end up seeing him, tailoring game plans to his opponents. I mean, clearly he wanted to use his height and reach. He wanted to maintain centre ring. But I don't think he expected the fast start from Usyk. And that success that Usyk had, he took away the right hand as well of Joshua for different stretches of the fight. I mean, Usyk was able to nullify some of Joshua's best advantages. Usyk was winning the battle of the jabs, which I don't think many people would have expected. So Jim says he put money on Usyk stopping Joshua in the 12th round. You must have been gutted. About 30 seconds to go. I thought he's running out of runway here. Chris says, I've never liked AJ. When we were younger, he sold me a short weight. Okay. Stephen says, AJ's footwork is under par. Usyk played him like a matador plays a bull. AJ could not outbox him, as if Usyk saw 80% of his intentions telegraphed. Yeah, I mean, I think there was something in that. He knew a lot of the time what was coming. Clara Keats says, do you think Eddie Hearn regrets the lifetime deal? No, not at all. I mean, they've done good business together. Even if Joshua does, lose, again, I mean, he's still going to have a big fan base. He's still going to be a popular fighter. He's still going to make money. And I think they're in it for the long haul. However long he fights is another question. George says, fair enough, but AJ is never going to outbox Usyk, so may have well roll the dice, still has a decent chance of landing a big shot early. Well, we did see him land some decent shots against Usyk. I think that's one of the things maybe people underappreciate with Oleksandr Uysk is he's got a chin. He does have a chin, and we saw that on display. There are some of those shots that Usyk took would have staggered other fighters probably worse. Brypom, I hope there's an investigation for the early bell. I'm going to have to go and check that back out. He certainly was on the verge of getting stopped late. Adam Fahey with War Usyk. And Adam had actually sent me a tweet last night. Who did I think was going to win? And it's one of these things, I mean, ahead of the fight, I really had no idea who was going to win. There were so many variables. I mean, Joshua was the favourite for a reason, but for all the reasons I covered in a lot of my pre-fight videos, Usyk was more than just a live dog. He could win this fight, and we saw a great performance. Chris says AJ cheated a few times in this fight. Tommy Pickle says Joshua still a cash cow. Yeah, he is. Mr. Higgins says totally agree Unger deserves a big hometown fight. If Usyk could get a fight in the Ukraine, that'd be huge for him. Kevin says AJ was dominated. Eddie Sassa says Robocop. Henry says Joshua is finished. See, I don't think that Joshua is finished, and I think sometimes we end up being especially in boxing, a little bit reactionary with, how we view fighters and losses. I mean, it's in MMA, a loss is not the end. I mean, even in boxing, if you fight certain fighters and you have the certain mindset, good performances like a Derek Chisora, even a loss is not the end. But I think at the elite and the top level, because obviously Joshua is at a different level to Chisora, I don't think we can just write these guys off. Styles make fights, performances make fights. You saw a performance there from Usyk, which is one that, we've got to give him a lot of credit. AMC 8, he'll beat Joyce as an amateur. Joyce is a beast now. See, I think that would be a very interesting fight, Joe Joyce and Oleksandr Uysk. I mean, people often like to point to that fight that they had in 2013. Joyce had been involved in boxing for only a few years. That was his first or second, something like, I can't remember. I did a video on Joe Joyce a few years back, but that was one of his early sort of fights in the World Series of Boxing. And yeah, I mean, Usyk was a seasoned fighter at that point, already an Olympic gold medalist. It's hard to draw too much from something that happened 8 years ago. Joyce's style might still look a little bit rudimentary, but he's extremely effective. I mean, he would certainly be a guy that I think would be like a Chisora, trying to walk through Oleksandr Usyk and just go through him like a wrecking ball. Okay, getting down to the chat here. Sorry, I fell behind a little bit. No Muss, No Fuss says, I think Chisora came out looking better than AJ at the end of his fight with Usyk. Chris Payne says, I'm Ronnie Pickering's agent. Let's get this on. Someone saying that he should face Joshua. Aunt Tifa says Canelo would even beat AJ. Come on now. 39 Devonshire. Who wants to see AJ versus Ronnie? Okay, we've got a little bit of a Ronnie Pickering theme going on here. So we're 1 hour 5 into the live stream here. So just to recap. So the cards, 117, 112, 116, 112, 115, 113. The last card was the British judge, Howard Foster. Usyk puts on the performance of a lifetime. Steps up from cruiserweight a couple of years ago. He was the undisputed champion. He had a shot at the WBO champion via his super champion status. He waited. He had those fights against Chaz Witherspoon, Derek Chisora. Didn't sparkle. Had some, moments to get through of adversity, especially in the Chisora fight. There are a lot of questions heading into this one. But he put on a performance that was a memorable one. The fight of his life, that he's trained for all his life. Outboxed Anthony Joshua. Almost stopped him late. And the new heavyweight champion, the unified heavyweight champion, Oleksandr Uysk. Congratulations to that man. So, a couple more comments and we will wrap it up. Starting to an hour of talking straight with a few sips of water. It's a little bit hard on the voice here. But I decided to go live because, these big fights, these big results, doesn't come around that often. And I haven't done many live streams of late due to work commitments, etc. But, this was something I didn't want to miss and talk about. And I'm glad that you guys could join me here on this live stream. James E says, great fight. Don't denigrate AJ. I think the thing is, people don't realize if you say that Josh was no good, you can't give Usyk any credit. I don't understand. I mean, sometimes Tyson Fury will say that his opponents aren't any good. Well, why should we say you're any good? You know what I mean? It's like people don't realize they undermine their own arguments. But anyway, we will wrap it up there. Thank you for joining me wherever you are, morning, noon, or